What's up guys, welcome to the Chess Giant. This is Solomon Riddell, and in today's video we start a new series which covers different themes in chess strategy. Today we're specifically going to cover rook lifts, which is a very dangerous attacking idea that can definitely help you win more games once it's in your arsenal. And I mean, this has been used hundreds of times at the master and grandmaster level, and right now we're going to cover 4 of those games. In this series, I want to try not to just make up random positions, but show real games played by real players, which led to real wins. Usually in chess, our rooks stay on the first rank until the late middle game or endgame, when they capture a pawn or a piece, or every once in a while get it back rank checkmate. However, with a rook lift, we bring our rook from the first rank to usually the 3rd or 4th, making it an aggressive and attacking piece, usually looking to help checkmate the opponent's king. In this first example we have, this was a game played by none other than the former world champion Emmaunuel Lasker, playing with the white pieces following this bird's opening start. And here we see the move knight h5, just putting pressure on the king side of the board. And now in this position, black takes that knight. Honestly, black taking the knight does make a ton of sense because of the pressure that we're putting on both that knight and that pawn on g7, not to mention both our bishop on e5 and d3 are both very active. So here we see black just take that knight, trying to get rid of one of our pieces. And I think most players here would probably play a move like queen takes h5. I mean, me personally, this seems like a no-brainer. But in this position, we see white instead play bishop takes h7 with check. Idea being, after king takes h7, we see the former world champion take that knight off the board and then give up yet another bishop on g7. So guys, basically what white has done here is traded off knights and then gave up both of their bishops for only 2 pawns. And some of you may be wondering, wait a second, why did we just give up 2 bishops for only 2 pawns? I mean, in this position, we really only have a queen. Rook h8 is coming soon, and white is honestly in big trouble. Well, in this position, we now have this idea of queen g4 check, and the only reason that white played this variation is because of this rook on f1. Notice here I have king f6. We simply have queen g5 checkmate, game over. And now following the move king h7, we see Lasker play rook f3. Using this rook lift idea, he literally gave up 2 bishops for 2 pawns just so that he could bring this rook into the game, swing that rook to h3, and look to checkmate that king on h7. In this position, really the only way for black to survive is by giving up that queen on c6. So we see e5 looking to bring that queen to h6, but in this position, white simply took that queen off the board, played queen d7, and went on to win this game very easily. The next game we're going to look at, in which we see a rook lift, was played by Josh Waitzkin. And I don't know if you guys have seen the move Searching for Bobby Fischer, but if you haven't, I highly recommend you guys go check it out. It's a very good film based on the person and player of Josh Waitzkin. And this game itself actually has some pretty high historical significance for Josh Waitzkin, as it's the first time he ever beat a master. Here, Edward Frumpkin, the 2200 plus rated player, played knight b2, attacking that rook on d1 and that pawn on a4. But in this position, Josh didn't really care about the rook on d1, but instead played rook e3, looking to get this rook into the attack. And some of you may be wondering, wait a second, why can't black just take the rook on d1? When I first saw this game, I was wondering why Josh would ever do this. I mean, in this position, following knight takes rook, we got to take that knight back, and it seems as if our attack is slowing down. But because of the move rook e3, this king on h8 is actually now in a mating net, following queen takes g7 with check, forcing king takes, and now we see the move bishop f6. Now notice here, if king g8, we have rook g3, game over. If king g6, which is what was played, we have rook g3, and if king h6, we're still going to reach that same position because we have rook h3, king g6, and we see the same position. So here black didn't waste time with doing king h6 and then king g6, but just played king g6 right away, in which case we have rook g3 with check. Notice here, if king h5 is played, we have rook g5 with check, idea being if king h6 or king h4, depending on which one black plays, we have bishop g7 or knight f3, and we have ourselves a game over. So here in this position, black did not play king h5 because of rook g5, but instead played king h6. But now we simply have a forced mate in 3, with bishop g7 check, forcing that king to h5, rook g5 check. Remember, guys, we used this rook and rook lift, rook e3, rook g3, and rook g5, and now following king h4. We have knight f3 from Josh, game over, and for the first time ever, he beat a master level player. And guys, this is our third example of a rook lift, and really I just included this to show that you don't always have to use a rook lift to get some kind of crazy attacking checkmating idea. Sometimes you can just use it to put the pressure on the opponent. This game was actually played by Anatoly Karpov, and here he played the move rook a4, and following rook ac8, played rook d4, followed by rook d2. In this position, he simply swung around with rook a4, rook d4, and rook d2, and now as y'all can see, we have a battery ram on d1 and d2 attacking that pawn on d6 with the rook leading the charge. I mean, going back to the very beginning, white could have just played something like queen d2 and rook d1, but I think in this position, it's actually a lot better to have the rook in front, because now if this bishop on e7 is ever traded or goes out of the way, we can take that pawn on d6 and not have to trade down. Here in this position, black played the move bishop takes b3, and following c takes b3, we see knight fd7. Here, black was trying to capture Karpov's bishop, but Karpov likes this bishop, so he swings it all the way back to g1. And now following the move bishop g5, we see Karpov take on d6. Going back one move, I personally was pretty confused why black would ever play bishop g5, because it simply loses the pawn. But if black doesn't do this, we're simply going to be able to play knight d5, take that bishop, and then take that pawn on d6, because that bishop will no longer be there. And honestly, in this position, I think white has a much better game. But following bishop g5 and rook takes d6, Karpov went on to win this game very easily. So guys, those are our 3 examples. And now on this 4th example, I'm going to give you guys an opportunity to try to find the right move for white here. If you'd like to, pause the video and try to see what Ian Rogers, the Australian Grandmaster, played in this position, and not just the first move, but the entire variation. This is a very difficult puzzle to solve the entire thing. Here, white has a completely winning game if they play it perfectly, and Rogers did. But again, it's very hard to find, so pause the video if you'd like and try to find white's best attacking variation. Assuming you guys pause the video, the move here is rook d to d3. Now notice here, guys, there is a rook on b3, not a very normal square for a rook. So earlier on in this game, white had already rook lifted one of the rooks, and now yet again is rook lifting the second. Here white is wanting to play rook d to c3, taking control of both the b and the c files, and white is simply going to have a crushing attack. So we see the move here, bishop a5, looking to prevent that rook from coming to c3. But here Rogers just plays the move rook c3 anyways, attacking that queen on c6, and following bishop takes c3, plays the crushing move queen a6, giving up a rook, giving up a queen, and the whole idea now is that if a move like queen takes a6, we have knight c7 checking the king, and notice how this king is actually in checkmate because of a rook on b3, attacking both b7 and b8, game over. Now notice here, following queen a6, black doesn't have to take that queen on a6, but here black actually resigned. I mean, let's say black plays a move like rook c8. Well, against this, we're simply going to play knight b6 with check. Notice how if queen takes b6, we simply capture that queen, and pawn takes b6 can't be played because the pawn is pinned to that king on a8. So following the move king b8, we can snatch that rook off the board. And now if a move like king c7, snatch the pawn off, continue with rook b8, we have a ton of checkmating threats here, the most immediate one being queen e7 with a mate in 1. So here black really does need to take that knight on c8, and now we simply take that queen off the board, play queen a8 with check, take the rook on h8, and look at this bishop, guys. This bishop is actually pretty sad. I mean, I get sad just looking at this position. This is called a tall pawn. There's literally nowhere that this bishop can really go. It's simply trapped. We're going to snatch that bishop off the board, and we're going to have ourselves an easily won game. So here in this position, black really does need to take that knight on c8, in which case we're simply going to take the queen, and following king takes c8, we now have queen a8 check, forcing this king to get out of the way, in which case we simply win that rook on h8. And as y'all can see, this bishop on h7 is actually considered to be a tall pawn. Notice how there's not much that it can do. I mean, it's limited to g8 and h7. And in this position, it's actually just trapped. We're going to snatch that bishop off the board, and white is simply winning here. If you guys would like to see the full game played by Josh Waitzkin, in which he managed to beat a master level player with a dangerous rook lift, click the video to the left. If you'd like to see the full game by Emmaunuel Lasker, click the video to the right. Leave a comment below to let me know what other videos you'd like to see covered on this channel. And as always, I appreciate you guys. Thanks for watching. Peace.